the Jet Setting Wealth Advisory Podcast, where your financial journey takes flight with David T.U. As an airline pilot and financial expert, David merges the aviation industry and wealth management to help you navigate today's complex financial skies. Each episode features expert insight, blending personal stories with essential financial strategies. We ask that you fasten your seatbelts and sit back as we prepare for takeoff. Our destination, your financial empowerment.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Jet Setting Wealth Advisory Podcast. I'm your host, David T.U. Today's guest is Mr. James Butler, one of the nation's top experts in private air travel with specific strategies, utilizing the company that he has established and the current CEO, which is Shaircraft Solutions, a boutique aviation consulting firm that advises clients on everything from fractional jet ownership and jet cards to charter agreements and contract negotiation. He's been doing this for more than 25 years. James is also an accomplished attorney, founder of the law office of James D. Butler, and has represented both elite athletes and major institutions. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Forbes, and the Robs Report, and has served as a trusted voice on CNN and Fox News. So welcome, James. Welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Great to be with you.
Thank you very much. So, James, let's get started in finding out more about you and the business that you started. You had a career in law before launching Shaircraft Solutions back in 1997. What was the moment that made you see the opportunities in private aviation consulting?
You know, I guess it goes back to my early roots as a member of a fairly entrepreneurial family. My grandfathers had their own businesses. My father had his own business. And so I was always entrepreneurial from a pretty young age. Lemonade stands, charity.
I did that.
Carnivals, selling raffle tickets for my Little League team. That was always just kind of in my DNA. And I was working at a fairly large law firm in Washington, D.C., and just really had an epiphany one day that, boy, if I worked as hard for myself as I'm working for these guys, I could probably make a decent living and also not be an absentee father and coach my kids' sports teams and see their plays and that kind of thing. So that was really the genesis of starting my law practice. And then when you start a business, you write down a list of people you think are going to send you clients and where the business is going to come from. And I did that, and it turned out that it was completely wrong. You get business from places you don't think you'll ever get it, and places you count on don't come through. And so it's a bit of a roller coaster ride. But I had a very old friend. I think we first met when we were 8 years old, who worked for a sports marketing company called ProServe, which is one of the first sort of big sports agencies started by Donald Dell. Mm-hmm. And part of their business was representing professional golfers. And the head of that division had recently left ProServe to start his own company. And this is early 90s, and had a lot of professional golfers who started to get into private aviation. A team sports athlete flies on the team jet. You know, they don't need their own transportation, but a professional golfer is essentially an independent contractor. He has to get to tournament himself and has to get his clubs there, has appointments with sponsors and doing pro-ams, et cetera, et cetera. And so that became sort of a area that was interesting to professional golfers. At the same time, there was I would characterize it as, frankly, a revolution in private air travel. from a regulatory perspective, in the early 90s, the only way you could fly privately was either own a jet or charter. Those were the two permitted means of flying privately. In the early 90s, the regulatory environment became more flexible, and the idea of fractional ownership came into play, which meant that you could have multiple owners of an aircraft, each having a share, but not necessarily having their own pilots and their own maintenance crews, but rather having an overarching operator who would manage the fleet, provide the pilots, and essentially have an executive airline. Once that became a possibility from a regulatory point of view, private aviation just, pardon the pun, took off. And
Sure.
in the fractional context, companies that built airplanes saw that as a means of selling airplanes so that they were building. It wasn't so much that they wanted to run a private airline, but this was a way to source their aircraft into these companies. So companies like Raytheon, Cessna got into it. Warren Buffett became enamored of it. Started a company called NetJets, which is now and has been the biggest company in the space. And then it became even more flexible when a company called Marquis Jet came along, and their specialty was 25 hours. You could buy as little as 25 hours of flight time. Before that, 50 hours was sort of the minimum. And by creating this 25-hour product, it made it even more open to people to fly who had lower budgets than the 50-hour people. So with all that going on, my client who had the professional golfers as his clients called me one day and said, my clients want to get into this. I don't know anything about it. Figure it out. And,
Sure.
and that's what I did. And I started to become facile with the regulations and what the possibilities were. And I thought, well, this is something I can do sort of on the scale of my business.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody else is really doing it. From a legal point of view, if you were an aviation lawyer, you probably, this was too small potatoes. You wanted to do major airline regulation or air crash litigation. And so there weren't a lot of lawyers who were interested in this kind of niche practice. And on the other side, there were sort of young salespeople who had been at the companies who had Rolodexes of lists of high net worth individuals who were, so well, I'll just go off on my own and I'll do these deals myself. But they didn't have the legal expertise. So in starting Shaircraft, I thought I can bring those two things together. I can do the legal work, I can do the aviation work. Initially, I brought in some aviation consultants to backstop me on the aviation side. But that was really the genesis. I started with a professional golfer named Scott Hoke. And then other clients included Scott Verplank, Bob Tway, John Daly. So we got to that, and it really just kind of grew from there.
Okay. Wow. Fantastic. So obviously your legal training background certainly has helped you to help your clients navigate the private aviation deals. Let's move on. So the private jet space has exploded, obviously, in the last, I want to say almost not just a few years, but over the last decade or two. For someone new to this, can you walk us through the different options? Fractional ownership, jet cars, charters, and who each is best suited for?
Sure. So let's start with fractional ownership. There's two ways to do a fractional ownership deal. One is to purchase a share in an aircraft. Generally, they're 800 hours is sort of what's the standard industry standard for the number of hours per jet per year. So you can buy 400 hours, you can buy 50 hours, you can buy any sort of fraction of that 800. And you will have the ability to fly that in probably not even the aircraft that you own a share in, because the company will have a large fleet and you don't really care. There's an agreement among the owners. One of the documents allows everyone to fly on everyone else's plane. And so that way you really, as opposed to having your own jet, if your jet is down for maintenance, you have no plane. In the fractional area, if your jet is down for maintenance, they just send it somebody else's plane. So that's the beauty of the fractional model in terms of availability, and also management, operation, piloting. All that is done by the operator. It's a single operated fleet. It's maintained by the operator. And so there's, for many people, the safety and security level feeling is highest with fractional because it's all done by one company. And
Let's talk about the jet cards and the charter.
so jet cards is a variation on the fractional theme. There are fractional companies that offer jet cards, and the advantage of those is that you're also, for the most part, flying on the fractional fleet. So you have the benefits of fractional. Generally, those cards, and it's interesting that they're called cards, and this is sort of a marketing genius started by Marquis Jet, which is, they make it look very simple. They make it look like a credit card. The documents are single spaced, very dense, but short in the number of pages. They tell you that you can't negotiate them. They're just boilerplate. Don't worry about it. But the truth is there's a lot going on in these documents. And that's really kind of the bread and butter of what we do. But let's call it a card for purposes of this. And essentially, it's the same operation with a fractional jet card as with fractional, just probably no more than 25 hours. And there may be more restrictions in terms of how long in advance you have to call in, what the availability is, because you're standing behind the promises made to the fractional owner. And so you get less availability, more blackout days, things like that. But nevertheless, if you're flexible, that can be a good option. Within that, or next to that, I would say are called block charter programs, which also go sort of under the jet card rubric because they tend to be smaller number of hours, 25 hours. But there's a big difference. And the difference is that in a block charter program, it's not a single operated and managed fleet. It's essentially, you have a charter clearinghouse. So a company will make arrangements with operators around the country to fly their trips. And so the uniformity is not there. Although there are some sort of audit agencies that might give a particular operator their premium seal of approval or whatever, which they use as a surrogate for the sort of quality control that people want. You essentially could fly on a menu of aircraft of different vintages. Some could be 5 years old, some could be 15 years old. You get a flat rate for that charter. It was essentially a charter, but it's single sourced. And so you can call one number. You don't have to be on the internet looking for various charter operators and not knowing who you're dealing with. I wouldn't say danger, but the concern there is that there are very few barriers to entry into that business. If you have a catchy name, elite flying, superior flying, premium flying, whatever, you can put up a website, you can make these arrangements, and you're in the business. And there's a tendency more and more with the internet for people to want to just have the ability to call an Uber. This is not an Uber, but they make it sound, and they make it feel like an Uber. Unfortunately, this Uber is flying at 40,000 feet. And so you can't just be concerned, for example, like most people in that space are, with price. What's the cheapest what's the cheapest deal out there? And now there's even been a slicing of the onion differently, where there's
Hmm.
almost per seat sales, where a company will say, you can buy a seat on this flight.
Hmm.
And there again, it's sort of a continuum between commercial and private, and that is going much more toward commercial air travel. They make it seem elite, but you don't know who you're going to be on the plane with, just like when you fly on United. So
Hmm.
but that tends to be cheaper than the fractional jet card. And then at the farther extreme from ownership is charter. And that's where you would essentially say, I want one flight, or I want a round trip flight. That's all I want to commit to. And you find an operator to fly you from A to B. Generally, the cost concern there is that the charter operator is going to charge you both to fly you out and to fly the plane back to its home base. And then if it has to pick you up, it has to fly out and then bring you back. So you're charged for two round trips, which is not the case, with a broader program, a fractional program, where
Okay.
they have algorithms, and they're locating planes in very different places. So they don't charge you, at least up on your invoice. The cost is built into the cost of the program, but they're not charging you to locate aircraft.
Okay. You've worked you've worked with some major jet providers like NetJets, FlexJet, VistaJet, XO, which is one of the latest ones, and more of these type of companies. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see clients make when they select a provider of airplane travel, private airplane travel, and then signing a contract?
The service of flying privately sells itself. It's
Okay.
fantastic. Nobody doesn't like flying privately. It's like a time machine, right? It saves you time. Instead of going to the airport 2 hours early, having a flight delay, missing your connection, and spending the entire day trying to make a business trip, you tell them when you want to take off. You drive up to the airplane, you get on the plane, you get to your meeting, you have your meeting, you fly home, you get home in time for dinner, to help the kids with homework, to go to a soccer game. And those sorts of benefits are enormously valuable, both in terms of individual lifestyle, but also for businesses in terms of executive retention. Somebody say, look, I'll do this for you, but I have to fly privately, because that
Yes. So
that's a
those are great benefits. What are some of the mistakes that you see clients
yeah.
make when selecting a
So
private or signing a contract?
so most businesses and individuals who get into this have no idea what they're getting into in terms of how the business is run. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten calls from people to say, I did this. I never would have done it without the kind of due diligence that I use in my own business, but either I felt a little sheepish about it, or I gave it to my general counsel and they had never seen it before, and so didn't really know what was negotiable or not, and make mistakes. And if you make mistakes in this space, it can cost you millions of dollars, not just tens of thousands.
So can you give some general common mistakes that people
Absolutely.
see?
Absolutely. I would say the biggest mistake is buying too many flight hours. The salespeople are incentivized to sell you as much as they can sell you. And so, from their point of view, hey, 50 hours is good, but 75 hours, I can do this or that. And people don't really understand that you're paying a purchase price, you're paying a monthly management fee, and you're paying an hourly fee when you fly the plane, and you're paying for fuel. So as you say, you get 50 hours a year, as you use that, it takes down your 50 hours. But let's say in the first year, you only fly 35 hours. And you can roll those over to the next year, but by the end of 5 years, you might have 60 hours left that you've paid management fees for. And I'll get a call from a client who's saying, look, my deal is up in a month. I have 60 hours left. What should I do? And my answer is, you should take a round the world trip because you've paid for these hours and they're not going to roll over into your next deal.
Mm.
And when you essentially look at what your all-in cost is, it's with a fractional, it's what you pay for the share, what you pay during the life of the agreement, the management fees, the hourlies, the fuel, and what you get back for your share when they buy it back at the end. And if you've, instead of 250 hours over 5 years, you've only flown 125 hours, then your cost is really twice what you thought it was going to be. Your cost per hour is really twice what you thought it was going to be when you started.
And these hours have expiration dates or a time limit on them?
The length of the deal.
I
And
see.
they may also have and will have limits on how much you can fly each year. For example, the fractional company doesn't want you flying 250 hours in your first year. So they'll say you can overfly by 10%, say. But at the end, unless you're making another deal, it's likely that those hours are going to be lost. And so that doubles your cost. And there
I see.
are other, if I had to conceptualize these agreements and how they work, essentially there is a cost structure. Who bears what cost? What cost do you bear? What cost do the provider bear? And they come out of the box very one-sided, where the provider is not going to make a lot of firm commitments, but what they're going to do and real remedies for you. And they're going to try to shift as much of the variable cost risk, like what happens with fuel costs, what happens with maintenance costs, what happens if the FAA comes out with a new reg and the plane has to be modified. They want to shift those costs to you. Our job is to make those agreements more balanced so that there are real rights and remedies for the flyer, as well as shifting as much of the variable cost risk back to the provider.
Okay. So let's talk about that. There's a common perception that these deals are take it or leave it type of template, boilerplate type of contracts, but you negotiate them all the time. Where is there actually room to negotiate in these type of boilerplate, take it or leave it type of agreements?
I would say it varies from provider to provider, and
Okay.
it varies even month to month. I really analogize this to sort of buying a car where at the end of the month, there might be a better deal than at the beginning. I mean, the salespeople are incentivized, there are bonuses. A lot depends on how popular the aircraft is, how many shares they have left to sell that month. If they're oversubscribed, for example, after the pandemic, there was a rush of people to buy fractional because everybody who had been pent up wanted to travel, and they didn't want to fly on the commercial airlines, and they wanted to fly privately. So at that time, if you went to a NetJets and said, I want to buy a share, they would tell you, we'll have a share available to you in 10 months. Because while at the same time everybody was not traveling, airplanes were not being built. The supply chain fell apart. Companies were canceling aircraft orders. And so there was a supply and demand, just like in any economic market model.
And how did that help you with negotiations?
At that point, there was much more take it or leave it from the providers. If you don't want it, I got a guy right here who'll take it on the terms we're offering. As we've gotten back to a more normal market, we see, again, varying by provider and varying by the circumstances with respect to particular models and particular share sizes, areas that are much more flexible. They can be flexible in terms of a lot of things. They can be flexible in terms of maybe there are some bonus hours for you to get every year. Maybe there is a lower management fee if you take a little bit larger share. And what we try to do is, because I have clients who naturally say to me, just get me everything, everything there is to get. And what I tell them is each deal has a sort of profit built into it for the provider. And within that profit, there may be a basket of benefits that you can get. Each has a dollar amount attached to it. And what we want to do is take out of the basket things that add value for you. And I'll give you one quick example. Generally, in all these programs, flights are billed at a minimum of an hour. And so if you fly short legs where you're only in the air for 30 minutes, say you're going from Washington to New York, that flight, even though you only flew 30 minutes, will be billed for at an hour. So if you have 50 hours and you fly all those flights for 30 minutes, you really only got 25 hours in the air, and your per hour cost is double what the sort of price sheet says. So for those flyers, we try to get what are called short leg waivers, where for a number of particular flights, they're billed at their actual flight time, and that's a real value for that. And we take that out of the basket, and the basket's now smaller. If a
Great.
different customer flies coast to coast all the time, that short leg waiver is not worth anything to them.
Right.
You get that. We've taken it out of the basket. We've made the basket smaller, but we haven't increased value. So what might be beneficial to them is a guaranteed upgrade.
Sure.
So they could fly without a fuel stop. So we do an in-depth analysis of each person's needs, budgets, preferences before we start negotiating, so we know where there is an opportunity to add value, maximize what we take out of the enhancement basket.
Sounds good. So yeah, your mission is to help clients get the most flight time out of the right aircraft at the lowest cost. And I think you just gave a perfect example of what a strategy in play looks like. Fantastic. And a lot of listeners on the show are entrepreneurs or executives who travel frequently, but don't really want to own their own jet outright. How do you help someone decide what level of commitment is right for them?
Again, we do an in-depth analysis. We send them a questionnaire. It's got probably 5 pages long to suss out everything about how long do they want this investment to last.
An investment?
Well, that's what it really is. It really is.
Of time, investment of time.
And money. If you plan to sell your business, you maybe don't need, in the 4th and 5th year of your deal, you may not need as much flight time because you're not flying to your various locations. If you're flying to visit your son who's playing college lacrosse, he's a junior now, you'll be flying up to the university for 2 years, but after that, he's going to graduate. You're not going to need that flight time. So we look at everything from, how often you fly, how many people do you fly with, what kind of luggage do you fly with, to get them on the right plane in the right number of hours, and to make it as valuable as we can for them and as tailored to their needs as possible. One area that surprised me initially about why people fly privately, especially with retirees, is the family pet. They don't want the family pet who's beloved in cargo. And so they're willing to fly private to take Rover to their second home where they spend the winter in Florida or Arizona. And so those kinds of things. I had another client who they were big hunters. And so they flew with hunting dogs who were, I mean, these are the elite, well-trained, very expensive dogs, as well as firearms. And they flew to out-of-the-way places. So we had to tailor a solution for that that allowed them to fly the way they wanted to fly to these out-of-the-way places. So it's
I
always
see.
for us, the fun of it and the pleasure of it really is creating an opportunity for these people to live as full a life as they can
Mhm.
within their budget.
I see. You've also authored an award-winning column on fractional ownership. What changed the most in that part of the industry over the past decade?
I think what's changed the most is the explosion of internet-based businesses that are trying to, I guess, to put it generously, democratize the market for private air travel, open it up to more and more people. And most of this is in that block charter area that we talked about. And as I said, there's very little barrier to entry. And I think people don't take as seriously as they should the enormity of this business. It is hard to make money in this business. It's equipment intensive, it's labor intensive, it's subject to variables you don't control, like the cost of fuel, the weather, and it has a very demanding customer base. And you put all that together, and it's hard to make a business work. And there are companies that have gone out of business. In the fractional space, I got a call one day from a fractional owner who said he had just gotten a call from bankruptcy counsel for his company.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
and he said, and this was a company that had celebrity endorsers and a lot of splash and a lot of glitz. And he was told, your airplane is in Houston. We had to scavenge it for parts to keep the other aircraft flying, so it's not airworthy. Here's a list of 10 names of other fractional owners that you've never met and don't have anything to do with. Good
Oh,
luck.
wow.
And
Wow.
so whether it's safety or being able, having a pedigree in the industry, we try to deal mostly with companies that have shown they can weather bad times. And this tends to be a very cyclical business. If the stock market is down, or whether it was 2008 or 2001, or companies that have shown they can weather difficult times, manage their way through them. Those are the companies that we rely on and we recommend. But because the internet just allows anyone to sort of put up a banner and make a deal with a charter operator, I think that's the big change, and it is one that we really warn customers against. And what I tell people is, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably
Probably
is,
is.
because if they're making that promise to you, they're making it to somebody else.
Sure.
And they have to perform all those promises. And so that's if it's probably something to be suspicious of if it sounds like too good a deal.
Okay. Very good. So, lastly, from a legal perspective, what should every high net worth individual or business executive insist on when reviewing a private charter or a private fractional ownership aviation contract?
This sounds self-serving, but it really helps to have someone on your side of the table who knows what the hell they're doing. Um,
Mhm. Sure. It's not
and
self-serving. This is what this call is about.
knowing it's not only to sort of make a better deal for you, it's to make you feel like you got the most value from the investment, you got the most out of it, and you're on a safe, secure, product when you're at 40,000 feet. And as I tell people, you should have a smile on your face every time you pick up the phone to call for an airplane in this space, because it costs too much money not to have that kind of that security and the feeling of, this is a great product. I'm so glad I did this. And I know I got the best deal there was to be made.
Okay. And for those people that are thinking or reevaluating their current setup, what is the very first question they should be asking when they are talking to a provider of private jet flying?
It's not so much a business point, but what I tell people is fly on the plane you're going to be on.
Okay.
Um,
What does that mean?
because some people, especially starting out, they feel like they're going to walk up the ramp and get onto a 737. It's like, oh, private jet, it's going to be like a big jet. And a lot of these are not big jets. They're small jets. And if you're 6'8", you want to get on the plane and see how that ceiling is. And again, it's part of have a smile on your face when you call for the plane. Fly the plane, see how noisy it is, see how the seating is configured, see how much luggage room there is. And then after that, it's follow the dollars. That's where you're going to make the most of your investment, is not only the dollars, but the availability. How many hours in advance can you call for a jet? How many short leg waivers do you get? Look at your entire profile of what you need, where there's room to negotiate, and make the best deal you can.
Okay. And very, very finally, where can our listeners and viewers that are on the show connect with you or learn more about Shaircraft Solutions?
Our website is shaircraft.com, shaircraft.com. You'll see some testimonials from some of our clients that we're very honored to have. You'll see a breakdown of our services, and you'll find my email address and our phone number there.
Okay.
That's the best place to start.
Fantastic. And for those of you that are watching this show, it will be on your screen. And for those that are listening to this show, it will be at the bottom of the show notes. I want to thank Mr. James Butler, for joining us today and giving our listeners such a clear strategic view into the world of private aviation. Your work at Shaircraft Solutions truly empowers travelers to fly smarter, protect their wealth, and enjoy a better experience in the skies. And to our audience, if you're considering fractional ownership, a jet card, or a new charter provider, don't do this alone. James and his team at Shaircraft are the experts you want on your side of the table. We'll include the links again in the show notes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe to Jet Setting Wealth Advisory so you never miss a high-level conversation like this one. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you for flying with us on today's episode of Jet Setting Wealth Advisory. If you enjoyed your journey through the fiscal skies with David T.U., don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and keep your financial knowledge soaring. For more insights and personalized advice, visit us at www.dtywealthplanningsolutions.com and connect with David directly